The housing crisis is wreaking havoc nationally. Our podcast discusses how it is playing out specifically in Black Berkeley, California, chronicling the lived experiences behind what people call gentrification, detailing our endeavor for our right to stay and our right to return, brought to you by Healthy Black Families. I am your host, Deb, and this is Telling Our Stories, the Housing Chronicles. Welcome. This episode is part 2 of our 3-part conversation with Alan Dones. He's a third-generation real estate developer local to the East Bay. I'm grateful to be here with you, Alan. So I'm hoping to get some understanding of what development is and how it moves. So let's dive in. Can you define for us what is commonly known as development as we try and educate ourselves about this monolith of how things just show up in our neighborhoods?
Well, real estate is multifaceted and it's complex, but I'm going to simplify some of it and talk
Appreciate
about
that.
a specific aspect of it. So what real estate developers do oftentimes is that they will acquire land. They will sometimes assemble land, buy multiple pieces of property, for example, in a neighborhood, and then combine them into one piece of property and do all of the work administratively and financially, economically to do that. They will plan what to do with that in terms of the vertical construction on it. What is it going to be? Is it going to be housing? Is it going to be an industrial plant? Is it going to be an office building? Is it going to be an educational facility? Once those decisions are made, they'll then bring the combination of capital to the endeavor, as well as professionals, services, design, contracting, maintenance, ownership, management, and they'll preside over that activity right on through developing a facility, eventually taking the shrink wrap off of it and turning it over to the ultimate users. And sometimes that development includes owning and holding that asset while it continues to grow in value. Sometimes it involves management.
I think that's the part that a lot of people don't comprehend, is the extended version of it, right? So developers hold a stake?
Some do.
Okay.
And so keep in mind that everything I just described, there are people that sometimes participate in one or more of those activities. There are some people that only buy the land and assemble it, and some people that only do the entitlement of that land. Some people that only build vertically. Some people that only buy a property after all of the foregoing has been completed. So there are different practitioners that participate. And some people do all of the above.
And the some people part of all these, they're all developers?
Yes.
Okay.
The people that preside over that are developers. Some are called land developers. Some are called vertical developers. And some are called, value-added developers. Some people will buy an existing building and do some kind of retrofit to it and increase its value by retrofitting it to address whatever the needs are of today, and then sell it to someone else or hold it. So those are all what you would define as development activities.
Okay. So that's one part of a very big thing we need to explain. So can you sketch out for us who the key players are in development and what each of their roles are?
Sure. So I started out by talking about the developer, him or herself. And developers are either individuals or they're entities, sometimes combinations. So as the key player, you start there. But then you have all types of people that are part of the industry that play critical roles. Everything from city planning, department administrators, public policy makers. You have people that provide professional services designing or managing, people that do the job of assembling capital to fund all of these activities. There are people that buy real estate. There are people that rent real estate. And there are, at the end of the day, people that are subjected to the impact of that real estate because it just has been built across the street from their home, or it's been built in their neighborhood. And so all of those people, by the way, are critical, important players in the real estate industry. It's just not everyone is as aware of it as they can or should be. But there's that to me, if you talk about who are the stakeholders, everyone is a stakeholder. And we all are somehow living in a dwelling.
Yeah, correct. And the government can play quite a few of those roles.
The government does. Yes, the government does play quite a few of those roles. And they play the role in some sense, sometimes by control of their public land. They play the role of being a landowner by sometimes deciding what's going to be built on that land. They play the role of a land developer by being presiding over the processes that you need in order to have your project reviewed by a planning commission. They play the role of the administrator and the overseer of that activity. And they often play the role of financer. They provide various financing tools to make sure that projects not only have the capital needed to get built, but they also sometimes will make sure that the project is financially viable by the provision of what we call subsidies and gap funding that is provided to a transaction in order to make sure that it happens. And when that happens, when that money is provided by the government, it's done with the rationale, which most of the time is correct, that that money has to be provided for the greater good, because that development is going to ultimately positively have an impact on the communities that the policymakers and the government presides over. So yes, those roles. Sometimes the government plays the role of a tenant that leases property, or sometimes they play the role of a tenant or a purchaser that buys it. So the government plays every role, and by the government playing it, that means all of us play every role.
Right. I think it's key. Thank you for, I'm glad I asked that question, because it's going to play, well, first, I think it lays bare that government has been pretty complicit in the way things have gotten and the reason for the way things have gotten to where they are, but also setting us up for what we're here to talk about, which is equity for Black Berkeley, what the city of Berkeley is attempting to endeavor. And this is going to help us understand it a little bit better. And so my next question is there communication between developers and the community members of areas that developers build their projects on? Let me rephrase that. While development is happening, before it starts happening, and after it goes up, is there communication between those that do the developing and those that live in the communities in which the development goes up?
Yes, there is communication. I would say that the experience is varied, but in general, if you're talking about the communication that takes place, for example, between the Black community and let's say the Black community in Berkeley and developers, the communication has not always been healthy. It has not always been effective. And it has not always led to the positive outcomes that are needed. To be a little more clear and expand on that a little bit, for example, is oftentimes the community sees the developer as the big bad, quote unquote, developer, the D word, and that they are just completely greedy and completely self-interested, that they are the great displacers and extractors from a community. On the other hand, developers often see the community as the problem, being that they're the NIMBYs, they're the people that are going to come with demands that are costly and impractical, that they're unrealistic and not necessarily supportive of this need to develop real estate. And the simple fact is there's truth all the way around to that. And so when you have people that kind of come with that level of distrust and perspective of being, on opposite ends of the spectrum and adversarial, that leads to a communication that's not necessarily productive or healthy. And so that's one level of communication. And oftentimes that communication happens in a public forum because the projects have to go before different levels of public approval most of the time. They have to go before a planning commission. They have to go before public officials to vote on, either the conveyance of the public land or the approval of the development plan, et cetera. And it's in those forums where that communication takes place.
Yes, these public events, I'm going to say perhaps takes place, but me as a person living in my community, going through my life, nothing has come in the way of outreach to let me know, hey, this is about to take place. Come talk about this. So I'm just curious, from your breadth of experience, right? Is there a casting out of information into the community that is worthy of development, so that I, as someone moving through my life, knows that this is happening and a meeting is happening, and that's where I'll find out, and that me coming to the meeting and participating in it might actually, along with all my other neighbors, have an effect on the outcome?
Well, here I'll talk a little bit about my own philosophy experience and how I go about community engagement. Um, you know, oftentimes developers will find this land, they'll decide what they want to build on it. They'll come up with some beautiful renderings, and then they'll engage because of some mandate in some type of community outreach and so-called community engagement. And that's been the model and the paradigm. What I recognize is that oftentimes when you bring those kinds of drawings and plans into a community that has the type of distrust that I outlined earlier, you're asking for it, a problem, because people are going to look at those designs as being all that they fear: displacement, non-inclusive, a harsh type of gentrification, for example. And to me, what I believe is much more effective is before you get, rigidly committed to and determined about what you're going to develop, that you should start that community engagement, start the dialogue when you just have the raw land itself, and that you engage in that dialogue with sincerity and a commitment also to be willing to basically not do a development. And it's a little counterintuitive for a developer to think that way, because most of them think that they'll never get on the same page with the community. But I think that there's more alignment of interests than is typically understood. What there is not is alignment of trust. And that's where the problems are. I find that what I get when I engage first with that community outreach is not only something that is different from what I probably would have ultimately come up with. It's not. Typically, the community wants what I want. They just want to be included, and they want to have the dignity of being part of the decision of what's going to be developed that's going to have such an impact on their lives. They want to know from the beginning that this is something that is really going to reflect their concerns. Now, that is also a process that I've been really gratified to find out, that not only is that community engagement not likely to achieve opposition if done properly, a lot of times some of the ideas that come from that community groupthink way, way far exceed anything that I would have imagined through my own development. In fact, I find that typically the community and that collaboration that comes creates better development possibilities than I would have even imagined to come up with on my own. And to me, that's healthy community engagement.
Right. As I was hearing you, it's the difference in, it's what communication means, right? It as a developer, these engagements shouldn't just be a box to check, right? They should,
Right.
in communication, if I'm coming to you with an idea or a plan, and I'm actually coming to you sincerely, I'm actually looking for your input.
Right.
Right. And in that, the possibilities are endless. So I'm engaging with you on the same level with respect, right? Versus this other thing of like, let's just do this and check box. We've already decided what we're going to do. Yeah. So, you as a Black man, developing communities that he cares about, of course. And it could be that a developer's plan might not go as they would want it to go, but so be it, right? Because the community that lives there should have some say in what goes up. I don't know if you remember, but when there, are problems in society, and we go out and we state that these are problems we will no longer be living with, it's the developments that get attacked first, right? If you remember in Oakland, yeah. And all those beautiful buildings that came up got smashed because the community was like, there's zero connection. And one of the things I remember is specifically the Black-owned businesses were not touched, right? So
some of our Black-owned businesses were touched, unfortunately. Yeah, but it was not.
But it became a dialogue of like, and that was in the very beginning, right? It became a dialogue eventually of like, we had no idea those are Black-owned businesses, how you moved in the community, right? So I think, and a lot of non-Black-owned businesses started putting up signs saying we are in complete support of Black Lives Mattering.
Right.
And there was a whole dialogue that started happening of like, oh yeah, and how, right? So all that to say, it behooves, it's the ecology. It's a principle of ecology, right? A tree should not come up in an area where the other trees are not going to allow it to thrive, right? And so it seems to me, when I'm thinking of things and it gets complex, I try to pare it down to what would Mama Nature do? Like, how does this work in terms of nature, right?
I want to tell you right there, what you just said was so beautiful. I need to get a copy of this recording because, what, there's a lot of talk right now. They have this thing called ESG, environmental, social governance. And they have this separation between environmental sustainability and social governance. And so there's a lot that's being invested in, primarily more so in the environmental part, the E, and arguably a lot less in the S. But the whole thing is a misnomer because there's no difference between the two.
Exactly.
And we have to get to a point where we understand that unless we're being socially responsible, we are not being true stewards of our environment, our climate, or the environment that we're living and overseeing.
Yes.
They're not, it's one and the same.
And until we understand that, we'll keep going round and round and round. I absolutely agree with you. And so would you say the city government is a conduit for communication? And if so, is this explicit?
Here's one thing that we have to understand about organizations is that typically they are not monolithic. We always try to act like they are, like industries are monolithic, organizations are monolithic. They're not. They're complex ecosystems in and of themselves. And we become better able to live within those and exist once we understand that. The city they have red state people and they have blue state people all within that organization.
That's so true.
And we tend to try to, oversimplify it a little bit. And, but I will say this, that when I look at a city government, depending on the type of city government, you have your administrators, your executive branch, you have your legislators, your legislative branch, you have your legal branch, and a lot of times the executive, the legislative, and legal are all elected officials. And and each one of them have people working with them. Some are with the program of social equity. Some are more geared towards, business and, the economy. And some have a good balance. And so that's what you're working with. At the end of the day, also, though, as developers or as advocates, we tend to give so much weight to one or more of those branches that we don't realize that there's the fourth part of the stool, and that is the community.
Us,
that is
right.
The people, right? Those are the voters. And so as a developer, one of the things, again, personally, that I've chosen to do is to start with the community. That's the hierarchy. It's us. We are the priority. We're the ones that first must be addressed and catered to, prioritized as we decide what's going to be developed and who are going to be the ultimate beneficiaries. And you start there. That's where that community engagement early on starts. And that's when you walk in and you're sincere about your engagement and what you're putting in front of, and you're sincere about your willingness to acknowledge, that's where you are placing your level of priority. That's where you're really given the power. And to me, again, as a developer in the industry, I understand that's counterintuitive for 99% of the industry right now. But eventually, I think it's going to be the norm. And it's not only going to be the norm because it's the right moral thing to do, but because it's the practical thing to do, because it's the more financially healthy thing to do.
So let me tease out the question a little bit more. When there are going to be these public meetings, which must happen, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. When they are about to happen, who is responsible for the outreach into the community? The developer, the government, or some other entity?
Well, a lot of the developers think that the government or some other entity is responsible. As a developer, I'm of the school of thought that I'm responsible for the outreach to the community.
There really isn't a binding protocol. It's left to whoever's going to do it.
There are binding protocols, but for the most part, they're ineffective.
Okay.
And my binding protocol is that which is going to carry my project through to completion. And so that is absolutely binding for me. And it's the only practical way to go about it. I have, for a project I'm doing called Mandela Station, the West Oakland BART, for example, we have a community advisory committee. It's about, anywhere from 10 to 20 people that would show up monthly for the first couple of years of our pre-development. And we put that group together. It was a very diverse group. It ended up, though, after about 6 months, with primarily these white people at every meeting. And a lot of them were the gentrifiers of West Oakland. And, the next thing you know, not only was that a little frustrating, but there were some in the Black community that were saying, hey, Alan is just being led around by all these white people. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's not me. And I had to realize that, well, you know what? You better start taking a good look at this. And I realized you can't expect everybody to be able to show up the same way. And when it comes down to the city council meeting or the planning commission, when those Black folks show up angry, I can't stand up there and say, well, we invited them, but they didn't show up. So no, but I found out once I was able to get outside of the emotional hurt of being accused of certain things,
right,
and really look at it, I realized, man, I was unrealistic. So yeah, then we have like big events where we bring our folks together. We have events where we pick up the phone and call people one-on-one. So what we've done is we've expanded that, and we've made the investment in that expanded community engagement so that we can be doing it in a multifaceted manner. And by the way, that little investment that you make up front, it pays dividends down the road. Yeah.
Exactly. That's definitely organizing 101, right? You meet the people where they're at.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you're not doing that communication that we talked about earlier, right? Where you're really able to sit and listen. The first part of listening is a check-in. How did you arrive? How are you?
When you talk about checking boxes, well, who was it that created those boxes? And at the end of the day, did they know what I just communicated to you? And, did they even have the willingness to kind of become a little bit prayerful and spiritual when they got their feelings hurt a little bit and go there? This is why, we have to be, very thoughtful about these things and transparent about it. What I have come to realize as a Black developer living in a mixed community, a diverse community, is that my community engagement has to really be focused on meeting people where they are. Not everybody has the same ability, for example, to come to a monthly community engagement meeting.
Say that.
Or a weekly community engagement meeting.
Absolutely.
Some of us are too burdened with feeding and housing our families to be able to do that. We can't always, be, and a lot of times, we not only are criticized for not showing up, but, we sometimes are too self-critical, in my opinion. What we need to do is recognize that you have to really try to meet people where they are. I have, as a general course, and sometimes we have to kind of check our ego at the door, and our belief that we're like the all-knowing, all that, and make sure that we are constantly, being open to that fact that this is, like you said, this is nature. We have to manage this process, and it changes.
Change is the only thing that is constant, right? Like it's being open to process is what allows you to be malleable through change. And change will come. It's the most definitive thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Written, edited, and hosted by Deborah Hailu, Telling Our Stories program coordinator at Healthy Black Families, Inc. Audio engineered by Adrian Davis and Salim Naji Ullah of One Hitter Entertainment. Shout out to James Shields of Creative Shields for our beautiful podcast artwork. Akila Shahid, Office and Media Manager at Healthy Black Families, Inc. for the many ways she steps up and bridges our gaps. And Wilhelmina Wilson, Executive Director at Healthy Black Families, Inc. for bringing all of this together. Casting out the net of Black love in service of all humanity, this has been Telling Our Stories, the Housing Chronicles. See you next time.